Hey everybody, welcome back to Gun Tote Minnesota. My name is Andrew, and today I'm going to be removing this Vanguard Equalizer 2A bipod from my Savage 12 FE and 223. This is kind of my coyote hunting rig. I like it a lot, but sometimes I like to shoot this from the bench. And this particular bipod is really great for times where I need more elevation or more primitive movement out of this. It's got this really neat spring and a little bit of pan and tilt built into it. Great bipod, but today I'm actually going to be installing this one instead. This is the EQ Precision 1QSC, and so it's a carbon fiber tripod. It's a little bit better for tabletop shooting and benches, that sort of thing, maybe light competition as well. I'm going to show you some different uses with this guy, but first I'm going to remove this and then install this one in its place. One thing that's nice about the Vanguard Endeavor series in general is they're just thinking of the end user, and they understand that not everybody has everything they need to get things set up. You might have a swivel stud, which is what's underneath this metal piece. This comes inside of this adapter, so if you don't have Picatinny already on your rifle, that's okay, because this particular bipod is going to come with this, and you still retain your swivel stud. So you're not going to lose that. You can still sling your rifle, and that metal piece has inside a crossbar, and all you do is remove the crossbar, put it over your swivel stud, tighten it back up just like I did here on this one already, and then you're going to actually put this housing over it and run your Allens through. They're going to connect and thread into this nice high quality stainless steel piece here, and it's going to be a nice tight fit against my Arca rail, or it's actually an M-lock rail that I have here. I removed the rubber piece when I'm working with something like this, just so that the threads have enough engagement. But if you're working with a traditional stock, which I would suppose that the majority of people watching this video, if you're purchasing this bipod, you're probably going with more of a traditional forearm. You're not going to have to remove that rubber piece most of the time. It's going to work just fine with the rubber piece on traditional forearms, but on this particular kind of aftermarket stock I have for the Savage, it's going to work fine for me to remove it. It's not going to mar it up or damage it, and it's still going to engage really nice and tightly. So if you have a chassis style rifle, you might have to do that. If you have a traditional wood stock or rubber stock, you're going to want to keep that rubber piece on there to keep it from marring anything up, damaging it, and it's going to grip really, really well. That's why this was designed that way. And the engagement on that just has a couple clips. It sits in that channel like that, and you can kind of see the scoop of a traditional forearm, how that would meet up. Otherwise, you will be okay doing exactly what I've done here. I've done it several times for long periods of time under heavy recoil with different rifles, and I've never had an issue with it. One suggestion I make is not to completely tighten down one side before the other. I like to bounce back and forth. I'll kind of get one just about finger tight and move to the other side a little firmer, and then I'll go ahead and crank them down. But don't strip them out, don't overdo it. Just enough where I would say it must be in the neighborhood of 17 inch-pounds. Something like that is going to be enough to keep that steady on my particular rifle. But you can go ahead and try it out on your own. Just don't go so tight that you strip it out. Now I'm good to go, and I'm going to install the bipod. As previously mentioned, this is a Picatinny bipod, and these pieces both came with the setup. So I'm going to loosen it all the way up. I'm going to set it to where I think is mostly center, and I'm going to tighten that same lever down. I'll tell you more about the function of this lever in just a second. But for starters, okay, now I'll give that a little test. Make sure it's nice and tight. Right now, nothing's moving around. It's not coming off. And I can show you now on this side the other lever. So this lever has like kind of a little eject looking symbol on it, and when I loosen that up, that's actually what gives me the mobility for range of travel with the head. And you can see this one has quite a bit of range of travel. When I loosen that up, I can do pretty much anything with this head and be pretty stable from a firing position. If I want to tighten it up just a little bit, I can still get some out of it. Loosen up a little more, I can get a little more out of it. It's just a little tighter on the hinge point. And if I need just free flexibility to move around or rapidly engage things, got coyotes running in from different positions, you're trying to engage targets left to right, you've got all that movement built into it. Or if your scope is just not level, it's easy enough to grab that and give it a small adjustment. and level out your rig before shooting at a bench. That's a really nice feature to have on there. It's a big, large size dial, and something that's important about this is you can pull it out and move it around. So if you are running into something on your rifle, something down here, all you have to do to keep using it, if you want to use it in smaller increments like 1/8 inch movements, you could just move it down to the next position, and then you can crank on it more. You don't need to tighten this really, really hard. If it stops movement, that's enough. You don't need to go further than that. It's not going to benefit you very much. If it stops the movement, you've gone far enough on that dial. And then loosening, same thing. You don't need to keep going and going. If it's got full range of movement, you've gone far enough. So really, this doesn't require much movement or actuation, but if you ever get stuck or hung up on something like a stock or a chassis, or it's interfering, you just lift out, twist it to a new spot, and then keep working the dial again from there. All right, so I'm set up at the bench, and the height is pretty comfortable, but one thing that I noticed is my rifle is canted a good bit. And sometimes that's due to the ground that you're on, sometimes it's the table itself, sometimes it's something in your system, or the bipod head isn't matched up just right, the angle is off on the neck of that. The advantage of this particular version from Vanguard is that I can go ahead and make that adjustment on my own. So I'm just going to loosen it up a little bit, and now I can use my bubble level on top. I can get comfortable behind the gun. I can decide how much I want to load into it too. And I think I'll be fine right here. So I can reach back up, and with one turn, it's relatively tight. A turn and a half, and it's really tight. And from there, I can load into it a little bit. If this was my personal bench, I would probably actually pull out those spike feet and use them to engage, maybe even between one of these ribs. But because it's not mine, I'm not going to put the spike feet out here. The concrete would do okay. And then on the ground, the spike feet are awesome. It's been icy out, and so the ice, it just tends to not work as well with rubber feet. And I like to use a combination of the spike feet and the rubber feet. When I twist those spike feet out, it leaves about, something like 3/16 of an inch, maybe 1/4 inch at the most, of a spike foot. And then I have the rubber underneath that. So I kind of get the best of both worlds. And in adverse conditions, that's probably what I'm going to go with most of the time. Now, from here, I'm going to shoot some paper, and then I'll transfer over. You should be able to hear some steel as I shoot that. I do need to make some adjustments for the ammo I'm using, so I'm going to shoot a couple rounds on paper here. And then from there, I'll move over to steel, and you should be able to hear that just fine. All right, that looks like a nice tight group down there. This rifle does traditionally shoot 50 grainers really, really well. That's why I say it's kind of a varmint setup and rifle. The bipod did what it was supposed to. The recoil impulse is fine. There's, the little flex. You can see there's about that much in there. And with such a light caliber, you hardly even notice that anyways. But just enough movement there to load into it a little bit. You could do negative load if that's your thing. I find that this amount of movement isn't going to throw me off a whole lot at all. And so whether I'm bench shooting or varmint shooting, maybe doing prairie dogs, there's not too much flex in there. And if I wanted to take a little bit of that out, I would tighten it up a little more. If I wanted a little more movement or pan and tilt while I was shooting so I could be more dynamic, then I would loosen that up so I can engage the full field ahead of me. But yeah, I'm actually pretty happy with that. I would say the grip was excellent. There's a nice amount of grip on there. They're fresh feet anyways, but I can actually tell on the table ahead of me, kind of taking the varnish off, because there's some nice little pyramids on the bottom of the feet. So good engagement there, and no real perceived shaking or movement in the head beyond just that little bit of wiggle right there. Next, I'll zoom in a little bit on that bipod, and I'm going to turn my microphone off. It's going to be a little windy, so sorry for the wind sound, but that should allow you to hear the impacts at 200 yards. I'm going to engage a 6-inch piece of steel out there, and you'll be able to see the actual movement of the bipod, if there is any, and just how that handles the reverberations, vibrations, recoil, my input as I'm working. around different targets out there, you should be able to tell how steady this is just from that little bit right there. So I'll go ahead and turn my microphone off and engage those two. It's actually 220 yards from where I'm at right now. All right, so if you needed more elevation out of this, say you're in a hunting scenario or a competition scenario, you can do that by just twisting on those twisters, those barrels right there, and it's going to give you a significant amount of increased height and elevation, which might be beneficial if you're in a low spot shooting up, or if you're in a high spot shooting down and you need to, from a seated position, or you're shooting off a rock or something like that, or maybe the ground in front of you is just lower in general. This can be a really nice advantage, is having that amount of height. And then, like I said, you still have the function of being able to navigate this to fit the topography that you're shooting off of. So you're shooting on a really rocky ground. There's a couple ways you can level this out. You can use this adjustment right here, which directly connects to your Picatinny and your rifle. If you found that you needed a lot of adjustment and you want it to not be too wacky, you could adjust the legs some to kind of counterbalance the ground you're on, and then also use the adjustment in the mount right there. So there's just a lot of versatility to something like that gives you kind of fine adjustments as well as gross adjustments or large scale adjustments like that. These come equipped with push buttons, and there's a couple different ways you can stow it. There's actually two directions you can stow these, and when I stow them, typically I'm going to retract the legs, and if I'm going into a backpack, I'll stow them backwards, because the backpacks that I use, hunting backpacks in particular, it just fits a little nicer to throw it in this way, and it comes out a little easier that way, rather than trying to stow them in this direction. For whatever reason, the rubber feet just tend to grab on. I put the spike feet away if I'm not using them. I tend to put those away just so they don't snag or catch on fabrics. I use pretty high quality fabrics, but sometimes that can still happen. So I tighten it up like that, and if it's just not going to fit in the bag altogether, remember this has kind of a really quick attach and detach capability on the other side, where I can just grab that and completely detach it from that Vanguard Picatinny mount on the underside, which is very convenient. Now I can just throw that in the backpack, and when it's time to get it set up again, maybe I get to the range, I just find that center point, and with one hand I can actually get it started and almost completely tightened just like that. So that's pretty nice to be able to do it one-handed. Now, concerning compatibility with other Picatinny pieces, maybe you already have Picatinny integral to your rifle or something you've added. I have a Picatinny converter to Arca on this particular rifle, and I'm going to go ahead and throw on my Vanguard. Open it up as wide as goes. I find the center point. There's some big old Canadian owls hollering out there. I don't know if you can hear that on the camera. My microphone probably doesn't pick it up, but it's pretty cool. And they're huge. Anyways, okay, so that works just fine on mine. Looks like it grabs on really well. I'm going to go ahead and open up those legs. Those push buttons work really well. It says push on here. It's kind of like a gray coloration, and nothing is loose. The components are nice and tight in there. Everything seems to recess the right way, and there's a little bit of, there's kind of a bronze bushing or something inside of that, which appears to move really smoothly, and then it finds the indent or the cutout very, very well. Glides pretty well from position to position. And then when you get into it, this piece right here is going to lock and then kind of come out like that. So you'll know if you're stuck in a place like that. It won't move when it's locked in. Okay, it looks like that worked just fine. Let's go ahead and throw a few rounds with this, and I can tell I'm canted kind of goofy. So because of the advantage here, and here's an encounter where this is actually going to run into this a little bit. This is what I was talking about earlier, that if you need to, you can actually just lift out on the device, find a new spot, and twist again. And now I can actually navigate this and move it around, so it did not inhibit it, even though these are on the same side. I probably should have switched one of these dials to be the other side. But as it is, it still works just fine. I'm going to shoot my little rimfire here at 200 yards. I've got my reticle level. I'm going to lock that down. I'm going to pull it out and re-engage. That feels really strong right there. It's a great height for my rimfire. Go ahead and set my parallax, and then I'll throw a few down. Starting to get some mirage. A little bit of sun coming out. No, that's an impact. It's an impact. It's an impact. It's an impact. And that's an impact. Maybe I should turn my microphone off so you can hear that, and maybe I'll go for the smaller target, because that one rings just a little bit louder. Hopefully you can hear that small target. It rings a little bit higher pitched. It's got a nice ring to it. So the bipod is allowing me to do everything I need to for getting some of that cant taken out of the rifle from the position I'm on and the bench, which isn't perfectly level. So it is just a rimfire, and I know it's just a rimfire, but even rimfire has movement and vibration, and because of the position I'm shooting from, I did need to make that adjustment. So having the flexibility to adjust to correct my reticle is a big deal, especially when we're talking about an angulature change, which could have made me miss. In fact, if I just change the angle a little bit, a couple degrees, I would miss that target. It's small enough at 220 yards, I'd miss it. So I need to have good data, and I need to have a good, solid, stable position. And I believe that this bipod is stable and absorbs enough of that recoil and vibration. It's not going to move around on me. It's not bendy or flexy. It's pretty solid. So in my mind, the potential customer for the EQ Precision bipod that you see here on my Savage 12 FE is somebody who maybe appreciates a little bit of bench work, a little bit of prone shooting, and some hunting. On top of that, they might like the carbon fiber idea better just because it's somewhat lighter weight. They like the look. I think aesthetically it's very pleasing. It's cool. They don't need the length of some of the other Vanguard bipods, which are more hunting specific. They're very, very tall, and they can get very, very, very tall. This one allows you the ability to go reasonably tall and yet still sit down at a bench and get a nice zero or plank for a day with something like this. And the functions of the legs, although limited to one position for actual shooting, they can stow in multiple directions, and that might be some value to some of you for that reason as well. On top of that, a shooter who understands the importance of keeping their rifle level when engaging targets will appreciate this, because it has the ability to, again, let's loosen that up, navigate with so much, so much range. This is pretty much unlimited other than your actual angulature, but you can pan a 360 with this. So somebody who understands the value of having a bipod that can engage targets from just about any angle, and you can make corrections for your reticle's sake, for your scope's sake, to keep it level. I've heard it said before, I think this is true, that 1 degree of error when it comes to cant in your rifle or in your scope equates to 1 inch at 100 yards. So when you're talking about shooting at 200, 300 yards, and you have, let's say, 2 or 3 degrees of cant built in, now you're missing by several inches. So the ability to change that and correct your reticle and get things level is really important. And I think the person who's going to get the most value out of this is someone who understands why that matters. And maybe they run scope levels or rail levels built into their rifle. Lastly, I think somebody who likes the QD feature as well as the spike feet option. If you're a person who understands how slippery the ground can be, rocks, ice, the varying conditions that we experience here in Minnesota, I know that a good bipod is going to give you the options to have feet like that. And like I said, in my experience, I can actually use the spike feet and the rubber feet kind of at the same time. The spike feet engage just enough, and because they're integral, they do really dig in. I actually have to be careful on wood surfaces because of that. And then when I'm on ice, I get the spike foot dug in, and then the pyramids, very small pyramids on the rubber feet here, also engage on just about every surface that I've had. And they feel like a decent density. They're not going to burn out quickly. They're hard enough that I think they'll last a good long time. One of my tests that I do when I'm shooting a bipod or I'm building something new into my systems for my rifles is I'll go out and shoot with the ammo that I do know really well how it should perform. And this is a great test for a bipod, as I know on a day like today when it's not very windy, I know what the performance should be of the barrel and the ammo and the shooter with this optic. So this is the new component to it, and as long as I could still shoot under 3/4 of an inch for a 5-shot group, then I knew that the bipod was doing its job and it wasn't making it really difficult for me. Every piece of gear has a bit of a learning curve, and this one did have a little bit of a learning curve. I think the first 20 shots, it just took me a little bit of time to learn about loading into it, how much weight I wanted to put on it, or pressure or not, or no pressure, free recoil. There's lots of different ways that people like to shoot, and for me, I just loaded the bipod a little bit, not much and not with cheek pressure, just a little bit of shoulder pressure behind it. And I found that shooting in the prone or shooting off the bench, it handled that really well. And I was still able to shoot a .56 inch group at 100 yards for 5 shots, which is kind of my standard with that ammo in this rifle. And now I can see that the bipod did not hold me back. So it gets my mark of approval for a person who wants to do a little bit of hunting and a little bit of bench work. I think it's very lightweight, aesthetically it's pleasing, and it's a move in the right direction for Vanguard because I like the more that they get into shooting. They're innovating, they're thinking about things, they're doing things differently, and not just putting out the same product that everybody else is and stamping their brand or their name on it. They are actually trying some new things, and I think that's going to take us in the right direction, whether you're a hunter or shooter, competition shooter, target, plinker, whatever it is. I think that's going to take us in the right direction. So I really like the ideas, Vanguard. Great job on continuing in this direction. If you guys like this video, but you're more of a hunter, you might appreciate the video that I already put out on the Vanguard Equalizer 2A. It's the one that I took off at the beginning of the video. This is also a decent bipod. I think it's more geared towards hunting. You get more height out of this, and it's also very affordable. So I can say a lot of good things about these. They meet up really nice. They're very strong and integral into your rifle system. No matter if you're shooting 30-06, 300 Win Mag, 223 like me, or maybe even 22, I don't think it's going to give you issues. I don't think the recoil is going to break these or loosen up parts. It should be strong enough for all those platforms. So if you have any concerns with that, go ahead and comment down below and I'll try to get to your comments or questions. But I think you would like one of these bipods, and if this isn't exactly what you're looking for, maybe some of these other Vanguard videos would be more up your alley.